Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I'm Imari. I'm going to be sharing the Youth Job Spotlight for the week, and then I'll also add the link to our Youth Job Spot in the chat once I stop screen sharing. The first job I wanted to share was a field technician position at Dish Network, and this one can be found under our maintenance tab. And then I also wanted to share a job from our government jobs tab, which is an administrative assistant position in Fairfield. And then for our job fair, the upcoming job fair that I wanted to share was the Fairfield Sassoon Adult School March Job Fair happening on March 19th. And if you have any questions about the Youth Job Spot, I'll also add my email in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. We have Tony Lewis, or Dr. Tony Lewis, who is an associate professor at the California State University Maritime Academy um, in Vallejo, where he has worked for 11 years. His teaching and research focuses on human resource management, organizational strategy, and entrepreneurship, among other topics. And as a proud faculty member of the West Coast only Maritime University, Dr. Lewis is passionate about supporting students moving into lucrative and rewarding careers in maritime business and supply chain management. So thank you, Tony. And yeah, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anijah and Amari. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with all of you here on Workforce Wednesday. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Thanks for having me. I am Tony Lewis. I've been working at Cal Maritime for um, about 11 years now, as Nigel noted. Um, and I'm from the Midwest, so I've kind of absorbed a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk with you about. I teach students who are preparing for careers in maritime business and supply chain management. And I want to talk with you about these jobs for a couple reasons. First, it's an area of enormous growth. The jobs are really high quality, high paying, fantastic jobs. And Cal Maritime is right here in Vallejo, and it's a fantastic resource for being able to access some of the opportunities that I want to talk with you about today. And so these are great jobs, and I'd like to make you aware of some of these. So what I want to talk to you a little bit about is just give a little bit of an overview about maritime business, what it means when we talk about that. And as part of that introduction, we are going to talk about this idea, this basic concept of intermodal transportation. Big word, might be new to some of you. We're going to break it down a little bit here. I want to talk about some important maritime routes and ports that exist around the world to draw your attention to the international aspect of maritime business and supply chain management, which we're also going to talk about. And then I want to talk with you about opportunities in maritime business and in supply chain management. So let's get started. If you are willing to chime in here, I sure appreciate if you can share your video with me. If not, that's okay too. But I wonder if you could kind of do an audit of yourself and ask, are you wearing a piece of clothing that was made in the USA right now? Is anyone out there wearing a piece of clothing that was made in the USA right now? Do you have one near you? I'm gonna guess it's pretty unlikely. It's pretty unlikely that someone is wearing a piece of clothing that was made in the US, yet we live in the US, right? So why is all of our clothing coming from overseas, right? Most likely, if you look at where almost any piece of clothing that you're wearing right now, it was most likely made in China, maybe in Vietnam, a lot of it made in India or Bangladesh. And so what has changed in the world? If I would have asked you that question 100 years ago, if you were sitting in my class in 1920 or something like that, almost everybody would have raised their hand and said that every piece of clothing I'm wearing was made in the USA. But today, almost every piece of clothing we're wearing was not made in the USA. It was made thousands of miles away. So, how has this happened? What's different now? And I want to talk to you a little bit about the way that the world has changed over the past couple hundred, not even couple hundred years, or even 50 years, and talk about some of the opportunities that those changes present for you. Um, and I want to talk to you about this concept that we refer to in maritime business and supply chain management called intermodal transportation. It's a big word, but it's pretty simple. Inter means multiple, and modal means modes, like types. So it's multiple types of transportation is what this word means. Okay. And so this is transportation involving more than one form of carrier, for example, ship, rail, truck, and air. Okay? And if we kind of think back to a time where it was unlikely that you would be wearing a piece of clothing from overseas, this is the way that a port might look at this time. You would see a sail ship come into port. You would see a bunch of people go on there and pretty much with their hands unload baskets of potatoes or silk or spices or tea or whatever. And so this was a very cumbersome, slow, inefficient process. And basically, you couldn't get the stuff unless you happened to live close to a port. As time goes on and we reach the Industrial Revolution around the turn of the century in the early 1900s, we begin, especially in the US, to see this spider web of railroads begin to cover the country. And so now no longer do you need to live close to a port in order to benefit from international trade, because the goods that are brought into a port can be moved very quickly, very efficiently from the port on railroads. And so we have this. This is what fuels the United States becoming the powerhouse, one of the most powerful country in the world today. Is this combination of ports, international trade, and then being able to move all of that stuff very quickly, efficiently, cheaply to people that want it. And so this creates all kinds of economic growth in places like Cleveland, Detroit, Minnesota, where I'm from. Places that are very far from ports can grow economically because they have access to railroads. And another big change that we see is the advent of containerization, which it may seem obvious, it may seem simple to us, but this changed the world. It happened around the Vietnam War. And what happened was that someone figured out that this process of having people go on the ship and carry a basket of potatoes and so forth off the ship by hand was very inefficient. A lot of the stuff, especially whiskey, you might imagine, would go missing, right? And so theft was a problem. And so containerization was developed, and it was pioneered by the U.S. military during the Vietnam War. And the efficiency benefits were so obvious that very quickly all of international trade happens, almost all of it, in these containers that we see so frequently, especially being close to our very vibrant port of Oakland here. So all of a sudden, we can very cheaply get stuff to you. And you've probably seen how this happens, right? These containers can be very easily taken right from the ship, put on a train, put on a truck, and easily move inland. So the advent of these containers reduced the prevalence of what in the maritime industry is called break bulk cargo. This is what I just described, someone grabbing just cargo laying on the ground of the ship, basically, and moving it. And so this containerization made loading and unloading much cheaper. It allowed for the possibility of piggybacking, which is just what I described, this process of taking a container off the ship, putting it right on a truck, and moving it to where it's going. So this is kind of the format that we see almost uniformly in international trade and maritime business. We see containers coming into the port on an ocean carrier, and then they are unloaded very efficiently with no human hands touching the cargo ever. It's happening with big cranes that we all see. The Port of Oakland, obviously, being a big, an obvious place to see that. It's moved from there, put right on a truck, again, with no hands touching it, and moved there to an inland intermodal terminal where it might go onto a rail car and be moved further inland to cities in, Omaha or something like that, like an inland city that's dependent on rail transportation. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about intermodal transportation, is this process of moving from ship to truck to train, maybe back to a truck, right? And ultimately to the person who ordered the thing. Okay, so think about how complex this is, right? You've seen these huge container ships come into the Port of Oakland, and somewhere deep in that container ship is your Amazon order, right? And there are professionals who have a lot of times gone and gotten a degree to be able to manage this. And this is what the people who are going and graduating from the program I teach in at Cal Maritime, this is what they're responsible for managing, is this process. And we can see as we look around the world, these couple of inventions we just talked about, railroads and containerization and some other technology that supported those things, has resulted in what's sometimes called globalization, or like a shrinking of the world, where we're all kind of, we're not physically nearer to each other, but it's easier to reach each other. It's easier to interact with one another. We have these major shipping routes that crisscross the globe. They're kind of like highways in the oceans that we use to move goods from, among different countries. This has created enormous economic growth, of which the U.S. has been one of the main beneficiaries of that kind of economic growth. And it has made parts of the world very strategically important. So like the Panama Canal, you can see here where the P is on this label, you can see is a very important maritime route. Or the Suez Canal, you see in the center where the S is, also a very important bottleneck of international trade, where it really an important highway where there's just a ton of ships going through there. And also where the M is here on the right side of the screen at the Malacca Strait is another place where we see a lot of concentrated shipping. This is the highway between the West and China, between especially Western Europe and China. And we see thousands of ships moving through those areas every week. In the Malacca Strait, where we just saw the M here, okay, this is this little seaway here off the coast of Thailand in Malaysia. And we can see here about 30% of global maritime trade passes through the Malacca Strait. This is extremely important for trade between China and Western Europe, basically. And it is a place of enormous geopolitical tension. There is a U.S. naval base right there because of the importance of this shipping route. If there is, conflict between the U.S. and China, this is the place where we are going to see a lot of action. As we noted before, the Suez Canal, almost as important as the Malacca Strait, but not as important, a bit smaller. About 15% of maritime trade passes through here. And if we look down, you can see Yemen down in the bottom right here. There is a insurgency happening in Yemen. So there is a war happening there, a civil war. and people are shooting missiles at ships that go through this Suez Canal. So this has been shut down in large part, and ships, instead of going through the Suez Canal, are going all the way around Africa. This increases costs, makes things a lot more expensive, increases the time it takes to go through there. But what it also does is it increases the demand for graduates of my program who help to sort out these problems that are getting more and more frequently are coming up around the world. And a little closer to home here, the third most important seaway we see in the world is the Panama Canal. About 5% of global trade passes through the Panama Canal. But climate change is causing all kinds of problems in the Panama Canal, and its capacity has been diminished, and this is causing all kinds of complications. Some shipping companies are going all the way around South America. Some are getting on railroads in Mexico and using a railroad to cut across Mexico. But again, we see more problems in the way that trade flows around the world, and that's bad news for consumers, but it's good news for my students, my graduates, who are dealing with these risks and the problems that kind of emerge with this type of international trade we're talking about here. The other reason I want to bring some of these opportunities to your attention is because the Bay Area is an enormous hub. California is a hub for this international trade. The Port of Oakland is a premier port around the U.S., but you can see it's quite small compared to the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles, both close to L.A. These two, the Port of Long Beach and Los Angeles, are the number 1 and 2 largest ports in the United States. You can see here number 1 and 3 most busiest ports in the United States. You can see the East Coast has some big ones as well. In the Gulf Coast, the Port of Houston is a big, important port in the Gulf Coast. And so the Bay Area here in California, more largely, is a really important hub in this international trade system that I was just describing to you. And so this area is a great place to get jobs in this area. So I want to talk about some of those jobs specifically that you might be looking at if this kind of thing interests you. First is terminal management. So when we say terminal management, what we're talking about is a port terminal. Okay, so these are the Port of Oakland, for example, is divided up into terminals. And a ship that's coming in with containers, as you can see in the image here, will dock at one of those terminals. If you are participating in the propulsion lab project, you may get an opportunity to visit the Matson terminal. Matson is a big shipping company that operates out of the Port of Oakland. And so there are lots of job opportunities that are associated with managing this interface of these ships coming into port. And again, somewhere in that ship is your Amazon order. So how are we going to find it? And it's people that are working at the port, a lot of people who have graduated from an institution like Cal Maritime who are helping to sort that out. At the very top of the chain at the port terminal is the terminal manager. This is a top manager at a commercial port. And they are responsible, they're kind of the final say, they're responsible for the flow of cargo in and out of that terminal facility. There are also job opportunities in security because we're worried about theft, as I talked about already. We're concerned about terrorism and possibly a weapon or something like that getting imported through the port. We're worried about drug smuggling. We're worried about stowaways. We're worried about natural disasters and interrupting the way that goods flow around the world and the economic costs that come with that. And so people that have graduated from our international security program at Cal Maritime, a lot of times will be working in a role like security chief. We have the timekeeper and the stevedore are both kind of responsible for managing the union labor at a port. And so you might have heard the term longshoremen. Longshoremen are generally union employed people who are responsible for operating the cranes and managing the unloading of cargo. And the timekeeper is responsible for working between the union and between the corporate owner of the terminal to make sure that the whatever hours that people have logged, they've actually been at work for. They're essentially responsible for managing the paychecks of the people unloading the ships. The stevedore is responsible for managing that as well, and they work mainly with union representatives and make sure that regulations, workplace requirements, the union contract is being adhered to. Many of our students that graduate from Cal Maritime start their career as a ship agent. This is an amazing job, full of excitement, and one that is totally available, totally something that you could achieve. The ship agent is hired by the ship owner to be at the port and make preparations so that when the ship arrives, that they can get food on the ship for the crew. Maybe someone on the crew needs medical care. Do they need to get to a hospital or something like that? The ship agent will be responsible for that. We need to refuel the ship and get it back out to sea very quickly because it's very costly to be docked at the port for a long period of time. And so the ship agent is responsible for managing that interface and making sure it happens quickly, efficiently, and that the cost of the ship being docked there for a long period of time at the port is minimized. So these are just a few of the employment opportunities that are available for people who are interested in port and terminal management. We also have vessel management companies. These are firms responsible for the safe navigation and general management of each vessel. And again, these could be cruise ships, container ships, oil tankers, and on down tugboats, and on down the line. And these vessel management companies deal with routine maintenance of the ship. You can see here, these are images of a dry dock facility. The top one is Mare Island Dry Dock, which is another place. If you're in the propulsion lab project, you may have an opportunity to visit that facility. And basically the ship pulls in and they pump out all the water and then they do a bunch of maintenance on the ship, maybe repaint it, knock off the barnacles, that kind of thing. The bottom one is interesting. That one actually sinks in the water and then floats up and hoists the ship onto dry land so that you can do maintenance on it. Vessel management companies are responsible for chartering. Does someone want to rent the ship to move it somewhere else? Or do they want to rent just part of the ship to move a certain amount of cargo somewhere? And they're responsible, again, for the loading and unloading of the ship, hiring and training and managing the crew members who are on the ship. Again, this is an area where maritime business professionals are going to be leading the way. Marine insurance is another area in maritime business that this is probably one of the more exciting areas of maritime business. You have a few really important roles here. There's more than this, but these are the basics. You have an underwriter who's assessing risk. Someone will be sailing a ship from Oakland to Beijing, for example. And an underwriter will look at where they're sailing, what are the risks there. They'll look at the quality of the ship, the type of ship that's going, the weather, the season that it's traveling in. They'll make an assessment of risk and say, this is how much it costs to insure that ship. The adjuster will investigate and evaluate claims. So once an accident like the one you see pictured here happens, they'll make sure that they'll make sure that was the captain drunk, was the ship in the condition and the type of ship that it was supposed to be per the policy. The surveyor conducts inspections of vessels, and provides information to the adjuster and underwriter. A lot of times the surveyor is flying out in a helicopter because these accidents like this one here happen at sea. A ship runs into a coral reef, runs into another ship or something like that. The surveyor will go and try to make an assessment of whose fault is it? What was the problem that happened here? And they'll try to make sense of that. And if you get really ambitious and decide to go to law school, There are enormous opportunities for maritime lawyers who represent insurers and policyholders in court disputes. And this is really exciting stuff because where are these problems happening? They're happening at sea, where what is the law that applies here, right? It's international law. It gets very complicated about, were you in, a country's territorial borders or outside those or some, in some gray area. And so this gets very complicated. It's very exciting. There's an enormous international component here where, yeah, you're dealing with, different legal structures that kind of take shape around the world. And so this is a very well paid, very exciting, rapidly changing dynamic type position to be in. And then lastly, I want to talk just a little bit about company logistics. So at the same time, the port is helping to manage the supply chain of companies. Companies have their own people on staff who are responsible for managing the way they get supplies. So Apple is a great example of this. So you may think of Apple as a phone maker, but they are not. They don't make phones or computers or any of the hardware that they sell us. What they actually are is they are logistics, or another word for logistics is supply chain management companies. So I'm going to talk to you about what that is. You can see here, this is an iPhone disassembled. And you can see an iPhone, you might assume you can see some of it here. It has a huge number, hundreds of component parts in there. So it has a camera in there. An iPhone actually has 3 cameras in there. And all of those little cameras are shipped likely from Germany or South Korea or Japan would be likely places where those component parts would be shipped from. And so they're all shipped to factories in China. Apple doesn't make any of these component parts. They buy them from other companies. And so these companies are spread out around the world. The suppliers of iPhone component parts there are 200 suppliers in 27 countries around the world. And all of these parts are shipped to 2 factories inside China. And even here, Apple does not make the phones or the computer or whatever. This is a different company does this called Foxconn, who manages the factories in China that make the Apple parts or the final product. And so Apple is responsible for getting all of the component parts to those factories, but they don't actually make it, right? So Apple is a logistics company and a marketing company, but they're not a manufacturing company. They don't do any of that stuff. So they are really focused on supply chain management. And then finally, Apple ships their phones by air. This is much more expensive than shipping by sea, but iPhones can become obsolete, right? They're changing quickly. You've got a new model coming out. And so it's important to get those to stores quickly. This reduces loss, right? If you have a whole shipping container fall off the ship full of iPhones, that's a lot of iPhones. And so it's a logistician or a supply chain manager who's managing that risk on behalf of Apple. Those phones are ultimately shipped to stores around the country where we actually ultimately buy them. And then it gets more complicated than that. So once you're done with your iPhone, and it's the same if you have an Android phone or whatever, we have what's called reverse logistics. So Apple takes the parts from the iPhone that you trade in with them and reintroduces those into the supply chain and uses the or whatever to make new iPhones. So think how complicated this is to take those parts out of the old iPhones and get them back into the supply chain, back to the factories in China to make new iPhones with. So this is the complexity that Apple is dealing with, and it is students that start a degree program in the area that I'm focused in that wind up managing this complexity. Dealing with supply chain management. There are many companies around the world. There's like 10,000 parts in a Toyota, and Toyota has like 20, 30 different models of cars that they produce. So think about how complex that is. And it is supply chain managers who are dealing with that. But it's not just in for-profit corporate world where this is happening. It's also nonprofit companies. So, like Doctors Without Borders is a nonprofit organization responsible for bringing medical care to people around the world if they're hit with a hurricane or if it's just a country that doesn't have a lot of resources and needs some support. Think about how complex this is, right? If a hurricane, goes in and wipes out Puerto Rico, for example, how are you going to get stuff to the people that need it? It is supply chain managers and logisticians who support organizations like Doctors Without Borders to get those humanitarian supplies to the people that need it. Of course, Walmart is a big one here. There's a lot of action in the maritime industry in supply chain management, and we see it in government and especially in the military. This is how wars are won or lost, is in logistics. You can have the fanciest ship or plane or whatever you want, but if it doesn't have ammunition and fuel, it's useless. And so being able to have reliable, resilient supply chains is critical for the U.S. military and many, many other companies. So this is a really exciting area. It's becoming more exciting. The problems around the world that are making it difficult to manage supply chains are just getting more. We're seeing more of those problems. And so demand for these types of jobs is going. The students that are graduating from my program are getting fantastic job offers in the $70,000 to $80,000 starting range, and all of those people are going to be up over six figures, up over $100,000 within a few years, because there's just so much demand in this field. You can get started on this right here in Vallejo at Cal Maritime. And I can see I ran a little bit long here. So I hope you're feeling excited about some of these opportunities. And if anyone has any questions, I'd like to answer those questions now. Um, Thanks, Amari. So I studied business, and very much a I studied business. I'm a professor. I teach international business and management and entrepreneurship at Cal Maritime. So yeah, I studied those things and very much stumbled into this maritime business supply chain management thing. But I'm happy I did. It's a very exciting field to be involved in. Any other questions? Last call for questions. My biggest challenge as a professor, I think, is someone. Feel free just to talk too, but the chat works as well. But um, I think the biggest challenge is that that this area is so exciting. It's really blowing up. It's getting it's huge. This area of supply chain management and maritime business. Um, and it's difficult to get people to understand that. Everyone, wants people to start their degree program, right? So if you talk to anyone who's representing any college degree program, they're going to tell you that their area is very hot and there are a lot of job opportunities, but this is very hot. There's enormous growth happening here. I'm watching my students and get fantastic jobs, and it's not the top of the class. You don't have to be a straight A student. You don't have to, you got to work hard. You don't have to be the hardest working or the smartest person that ever, that you ever saw to be able to take these to get these opportunities. And it is not all the top of my class. It's very average students who are getting amazing outcomes, career outcomes from having positioned this way. So I think that's the most exciting thing about this and kind of the most difficult thing to get people to understand, because everyone is pitching their degree program, their college program in that way. But it really is the case here. There's enormous opportunity here. So that's the main thing I want people to understand. Yeah, the companies we see people. Oh, sorry, I saw another question here. How long is the hiring process for entry level positions? The hiring process is pretty quick. My students, usually from interview to hiring can be a week or 2 weeks, something like that. Can be longer than that, depending on the company. Um, but I mean, the main thing is just to get going and really to be presenting yourself to people as someone who has looked at these opportunities and is really excited about opportunities in maritime business and supply chain management specifically. And so people are finding a lot of success finding jobs here. Companies you might be looking at here. Well, you just had San Francisco ferry service, I believe I was told here in the last Workforce Wednesday from last week. That is a great example of a company that's operating in the space I'm describing here. So that's one. If you are involved in the propulsion lab project with Cal Maritime, you will likely visit the Matson terminal, which is a very large shipping firm, one of the biggest in the Bay Areas. They're based in Hawaii, and they've got a big presence at the port of Oakland. So Matson is one to keep in mind. Crowley, Crowly, is a big vessel management company. We just talked about vessel management. They are responsible for hiring, training the crew, routine maintenance on the vessel, regulatory compliance, those kind of things, basically managing the ships. And they're a huge company with operations in the port of Oakland. Um, Mare Island Dry Docks is another one. You saw images of Mare Island Dry Docks in the presentation here. They're based right on Mare Island in Vallejo and are responsible for the maintenance, that kind of thing of ships. They bring them in, they pump out the water so they can get at the propellers and underneath and that kind of thing. And they're also very much an important player in the space I'm talking about here. But almost every company is going to be involved in supply chain man. Any company that for sure, any company that's making a physical product that you hold in your hand or delivering that product, right? Like Amazon or FedEx or Wayfair or Walmart, or anyone making the product like a Tesla or Toyota, right? Apple, these companies we talked about, they all are hiring people with the skill set that I'm describing. They're hiring people with expertise in supply chain management and in maritime business who understand how trade flows around the world, how to minimize the risks, how to optimize the benefits, those kind of things. So the companies here are endless, but there's a few that are more attractive than others in terms of the quantity of people with these skills they're looking for. But everyone is looking for these skills right now. They're in super high demand. It used to be the supply chain manager would kind of be the last person consulted after the marketing team and the operations team figured this stuff out. But there is more what we call geopolitical tension, just kind of like simmering tensions around the world and increasing violence happening at sea. We have pirates out there, you guys. There are pirates out there that this is what people that are professionals in the field I'm describing to you are managing these kinds of very exciting, very unique kinds of challenges.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Did anyone else have any more final questions? Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you guys for joining us for Workforce Wednesday. Did you have anything else?
No, just so nice to talk with all of you. And feel free if you have any questions, you can reach out to Anijah or Amari, and I'd be fine if they want to share my email address if anyone has any follow-up questions. And we would be thrilled to see any of you at Cal Maritime. It is a great institution. Students get fantastic jobs that graduate from Cal Maritime. We are right here in Vallejo. The costs are very low, especially they go down even further if you're living in Vallejo. So we would be more than thrilled to see some of you starting to start degree programs at Cal Maritime and to take advantage of some of these opportunities that exist. They are quite remarkable.
Thank you. Thank you guys for joining. And next week we'll have Cindy Lee, who is a director of software engineer at Murat Genetics. So we'll continue on talking about bio. And thank you guys for joining. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.